Okay, so this is part two of the reply to the oppression lupus cartoon. So where it cut off was, it seems to have something to do with a discussion about the tension between Pauline Hansen and Lydia Thorpe, which is largely created by Pauline Hansen. Technically, the claim that Lydia Thorpe was pulling the race card was a false claim and dog whistle that Pauline Hansen made on Sky News in response to Lydia Thorpe making her own misogyny speech against Senator Van. It turned out that there was a actual genuine sexual harassment at work issue going on between them two, and Mr. Van had in fact done that with other female political staffers and parliamentarians or something before. You'd have to look up the case to find out the exact details, but it turned out that so she was. The problem there is that Pauline Hanson seems to think that if somebody is an Aboriginal person like Lydia Thorpe, that they must only be pulling the race card and not have a genuine complaint, or that any complaints they have are the race card, and that is fundamentally untrue. It needs to be acknowledged that with Lydia Thorpe, that when you talk about discrimination, the kind of discrimination that someone like Lydia Thorpe experienced is pale compared to people in the remote communities who have no pub because they're that far away from a pub, like they're in Whoop Whoop, who were deliberately targeted by successive Conservative governments, and that was supported by some ALP governments as well, for what was called the Inju or Basics card situation. So there was a situation where people were getting welfare quarantine on the stereotype of Aboriginal alcoholism. And only if they just so happened to live in communities that were not too far from, say, a good spot for uranium mining or coal seam gas fracking. So as you might imagine, that type of discrimination is in fact racist, and someone who grew up in Melbourne or was an activist in Melbourne can't personally claim to have experienced that discrimination. However, it does need to be acknowledged that Lydia Thorpe does have, like so many people in Australia, mixed race ancestry. So when she's spoken up on behalf of her some of the issues that relate to her Aboriginal ancestry, you can see that someone in that position would actually take it a bit personally. So the idea of pan Aboriginal nationalism. So Aboriginality or indigeneity beyond tribal boundaries is something that's had to occur because of the centre of imperial forces being in basically Canberra, despite all the tribes being in lots of different spots. So there's sort of like a attempt at cooperation between tribes is important, and so this false label, and a false label is in fact the correct one, Aboriginal versus Indigenous, type of thing, or pan-indigeneity is sort of something that's come about as a consequence. But in actual truth, people usually identify with whichever tribe they come from, in a similar way that Europeans don't usually identify as white people. They usually identify as, Greeks or Italians or Polish or whatever. So we have to sort out what race might mean and put that into context. With Lydia Thorpe not taking or refusing to take to swear an oath to the Crown, she was in a very awkward position as someone who is elected to the Senate, because it is an expectation of that Senate that you do that. The problem is that there is actually no lawful or legitimate reason why anyone in the Parliament should swear an oath to the Crown. And the reason being for that is because the lack of treaties means that the Constitution isn't fully ratified. Okay, it's not actually considered a legal constitution. There has been no ceasefire treaty. There has been no peace treaty. There has been none of those things. There is actually lots of groups in Australia, and each one needs their own treaty, not just one treaty. And so subsequently, it raises a bit of an issue of what treaty means for people. Now, some people reckon that the Victorian Parliament before Lydia Thorpe might have done a treaty with quote unquote the Indigenous people of Victoria. The problem is that we don't actually know the contents of that treaty right now, and that is a overstretch because there's more than one group, and some of the groups overlap into across the New South Wales border, and some overlap into the South Australia border as well. And so it's a bit more. The landscape of how the states got mapped out is different from the landscape of where the tribes actually are. And so it's the debate about that is a bit complicated. So would Lydia Thorpe, as a Victorian person or person from that particular region, be beholden to a treaty that was done by the Victorian State Parliament? Well, we don't know that. It depends on the way that it was done and how it was ratified, and here it was actually ratified in accordance with the actual traditional customary practices of her particular tribal group. If it was done in accordance with the traditional customary practices of a different tribal group, it would not apply to her because she would be from a different group. Okay, in a similar way that if the United States of America made a treaty with France, it should not apply to Polish people. Okay, so on the subject of that, okay, as you can see, that particular issue is quite complicated all on its own. And we go back to Pauline Hansen and her tendency to pull out the race card and dog whistle. At no point in Lydia Thorpe's speech about Senator Van did she mention that she felt hard done by as an Aboriginal woman because he was harassing her. She just stated that she didn't want to take any responses about that man on that particular subject that he was raising, which might have been a woman's business issue.